Hi guys, welcome to the first session of Being Agile. And in this session, we are going to get started with story point estimation. I think this is the most important topic that Scrum team wants to know about. About story points and why we should use it, I will make a separate video out of this, the basics. I think you can also find a lot of videos on YouTube for that. But I found there are lesser video on how to actually get started with it. So I'm going to start this first session with this. What I found the major problem with most of the Scrum team is they want to actually start with a story point estimation. They want to transform from hours estimation to story point, but they actually don't know how to kind of do this. So if you are also facing same problem, then this video may be right for you. Let's assume that we have a product backlog like this. So a product backlog consists of different user stories added by product owner based upon their priorities that creates a business value for their product. Let's assume all these user stories are refined as well as prioritized. So to get started with the story point estimation, the first thing you need to do is from your backlog, you need to decide what are the user stories that you are thinking of putting on the first sprint. So it doesn't have to be accurate, but this is an gut feeling that you have that these are the user stories that you guys think will complete in, let's say, first 2 week sprints. Among those user stories, what you need to do is you need to first pick the user stories which is the smallest in size. So this is a user stories that you think is smaller in terms of size as well as complexity. So from our backlog, let's pick user story B as smallest in size. Now I have created 7 columns for this example. You can use any number of columns you want, but to make this simple, I will be using only 7 columns so that it will be much more easier for you guys to understand this approach. Let's assume that user story B is smaller in size in terms of size and complexity according to our project requirement. So the next step you do is you pick another user story, let's say user story A, then you relatively compare this user story with user story B in terms of effort. Story point estimation is all about relatively estimating. So basically, when we compare user story A with B, let's say we found user story A is comparatively larger in size and complexity than user story B. So we just drag this to third column. We will use similar kind of approach for all other user stories. So let's say user story D. Let's assume this is okay, this is B, smaller than user story B. Let's put this in first column. Then there is user story C. Let's assume this user story is bigger than user story A, but not that much bigger. So we will put this in borderline for now. Now moving to user story E, this can be assumed as bigger than user story A. Again, this is an example. So then there's user story F. Okay, I see user story F is bigger than user story A, but I think it's smaller than user story E. Now I can do like this. Maybe user story is much more bigger than user story F. Now if you see, we have all the user story that we thought would be part of sprint, the first sprint, but we find over here user story C, which is in the borderline. So what you can do is you can say like maybe this user story is much more bigger than user story A, but not that bigger as user story F. So maybe within that user story F time frame, this user story can be completed. Then you can put over there. Otherwise, what you can also do is maybe this user story is marginally bigger, but not as big as user story F in terms of size and complexity. So then you can put over here in the third column. So the idea is to kind of order all these user stories so that it matches some amount of complexity and size. So user story D is relatively lesser work in terms of effort required. User story E is much more work, and all these efforts are decided as a function of size, volume, uncertainty, and complexity. Now, the next step is to have all this column with some numbers, with some story points, with some units. So for that, what we can do is we can use a term called Fibonacci series. People use t-shirt size, but I think Fibonacci series is the most effective one. So what we need to do is we just have all this Fibonacci number in each column by order. So this is first column, this is second column. I'm just putting numbers. Initially, when we started, we just kind of ordered, but now I'm just putting numbers on each user story point. So let's do like this. So if you see, all user stories had some numbers. See, initially we did not even uh, have any story points units added to this. We just kind of relatively compared each user stories and put that in order. Now for each column we are putting some numbers. So this is how exactly you start with the first sprint, or any sprint that where you want to start with story point estimation. Now you can consider, okay, user story D is the size of story point 1, user story B is size of 2, user story A and C is story point 3, user story F is 5, and user story E is 8. So then you started with first sprint like that. Now at the end of the sprint you found that all these user stories were done within the same effort that you estimated, but user story C took much more time than user story A. You can then, let's say, assume that user story C took much more time than user story F, and maybe furthermore than user story E, according to your definition of done. So what do we do? So what you can do is you can put this user story as 13. Now this is the thing that we are doing at the end of the sprint. We are doing this to make sure we map our effort to correct story points at the end of the sprint. Now you move to sprint 2. Now you have different user stories that you're thinking of doing on story points. Now you a few things that you already have is you have a tentative idea of what is one story point and what is two story points, what is 3, 5, 8, 13, and maybe even more. Also, you will have some idea about velocity, how much story point was completed in that sprint. So, well, estimating story points for other user stories, you just have to now relatively compare the previous sprint story points and give them some unit value. So let's assume there is another user story K. You just compare with user story B, A, whichever user story you think like this matches. Let's assume in this case, user story K, it's same amount of effort that it took for user story A. So we just put that this is a 3 story points. User story J probably is bigger than user story K, and maybe similar size as story point E. So now you already have an idea about how to add story points to each user stories. User story R may be of similar effort as user story C. So we can put as 13 story points. As we move with few more sprints, then you will already know the way of mapping the numbers, story points, units with user stories. So maybe in fourth or fifth sprint, you already have idea that the two story points is of this size and complexity. Eight story point will be it's this size and complexity. So this exercise will help you to kind of get started with story points to actually map this. This will be really benefit for the developers, because they will now know they have a tendency to work with hours, but then they will kind of get an idea eventually to estimate in story points. That's it for now. If you have any question, you can put that in comment and I will try to answer those accordingly. Thank you.